My wife texted, "I'm not your property. I'll be late. Don't call." I replied, "I'm not your husband anymore. Don't come back." 5 minutes later, 50 missed calls. Look, I'm not a jealous man. Never have been. Probably never will be. I'm just a guy who appreciates the simple things in life. A cold beer on a hot day, a good football game on Sunday, and most importantly, eating my grilled chicken in peace without having to witness my wife's impromptu audition for every reality TV show that celebrates bad decisions. But apparently, the universe had other plans for me that particular Saturday night at Ray's backyard barbecue because Harper decided to throw all common sense out the window and act like she was filming a pilot episode of Single and Proud, the married edition. I should have known something was off when she spent 2 hours getting ready for a casual neighborhood party. 2 hours for Ray's backyard. The man grills hot dogs on paper plates and calls it fine dining, but there she was curling her hair, changing outfits 3 times, and spraying enough perfume to fumigate a small country. I asked her if she was expecting the president to show up, and she just rolled her eyes and said I wouldn't understand fashion. Fashion? We were going to eat potato salad under string lights, not walk the red carpet at the Met Gala. The party started out normal enough. I grabbed my usual spot near the grill, claimed my territory with a beer and a plate of chicken, and settled in for what I assumed would be a few hours of talking about lawn care and complaining about property taxes like any respectable suburban dad. Rye was flipping burgers. Dan was arguing about the playoffs and everything was perfectly beautifully boring. Then Harper walked in wearing a dress that screamed available louder than a neon sign at a motel. And I watched my peaceful evening circle the drain faster than my faith in this marriage. She started dancing, and not the kind of swaying to the music dancing that normal wives do at barbecues. No, this was full-on music video choreography complete with hair flips and hip movements that would make a Shakira backup dancer jealous. The DJ wasn't even that good. It was Ray's Spotify playlist, for crying out loud. The same one he plays every single party with Don't Stop Believin' and Uptown Funk on repeat. But Harper was out there acting like she'd discovered rhythm for the first time in her life. And naturally, she had an audience because apparently every party has at least 3 guys who think a married woman dancing alone is an open invitation. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I focused on my chicken, had a detailed conversation with Dan about his new riding mower, even helped Rye restock the cooler. But it's hard to maintain your zen when your wife is laughing like she's auditioning for a toothpaste commercial and standing way too close to some guy in a backwards hat who definitely peaked in high school. The worst part, she kept touching her hair. That twirling giggle move that women do when they're flirting. The universal signal that says, I'm available and interested. Except she's not available because you know she's married to the guy currently watching this train wreck unfold from 10 feet away. Ray leaned over to me. Concern written all over his face. Yo man, you sure you're going to let her do that? He gestured toward Harper, who was now whispering something into backwards Hattai's ear while practically climbing him like a tree. I took a long sip of my beer, set it down with the kind of calm that comes right before a tornado, and said I'm her husband, not her GPS tracker, which was true. Technically, I'm not one of those controlling dudes who monitors his wife's every move and freaks out if she talks to another human with a Y chromosome. But there's a difference between talking and whatever performance art Harper was doing out there. Then it happened. The moment that made me realize I'd officially entered the twilight zone of marital respect. Harper reached out, hooked her finger around another guy's chain, some silver thing that probably cost $15 at the mall, and leaned in close enough to count his nose hairs. The entire backyard went quiet. Not movie quiet, but that uncomfortable silence where everyone's pretending not to watch while definitely watching. Even the music seemed to lower itself out of respect for the sheer audacity of what was happening. I set down my beer with the kind of precision that would make a surgeon jealous. I stood up, brushed imaginary crumbs off my jeans, and walked over to my wife and her new fan club with a smile that definitely didn't reach my eyes. Excuse me, gentlemen, I said, voice calm as a lake before a storm. My wife seems to have lost her dignity somewhere near your sneakers. If you find it, please return it to the lost and found. The guys scattered like roaches when you turn on a kitchen light. Harper, bless her heart, had the audacity to smirk at me like I was the one being unreasonable. Relax, Mason, she said, waving her hand dismissively. It's just a party. Just a party. Like that somehow excused the fact that half the neighborhood just watched her practice for a career in exotic dancing. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't recognize the woman standing in front of me. This wasn't the Harper I married. The one who used to laugh at my stupid jokes and actually enjoyed spending time with me instead of treating me like an obstacle between her and whatever validation she was desperately seeking from strangers. Exactly, I said, maintaining that eerily calm tone that was starting to freak out even me. It's a party, not an open audition for America's Next Top Attention Seeker. I could feel every eye in that backyard on us. The kind of attention that usually makes me uncomfortable. But right then, I didn't care. I was done. Done pretending everything was fine. Done making excuses for behavior that would embarrass a teenager. Done being the understanding husband who just rolls over and accepts disrespect like it's part of the marriage package. I looked around at all the faces staring at us. Ray looking worried. Dan looking impressed. Jenna covering her mouth to hide a smile. And I announced loud enough for everyone to hear. Well, folks, I'm leaving before I start charging admission to this circus. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I gave a little bow, the kind you do after a particularly good magic trick, and started walking toward my truck. Behind me, I could hear Harper sputtering something about me being dramatic and embarrassing her, which was rich considering she'd just given a TED talk on how to humiliate your spouse in public. The crowd was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop, or in this case, you could hear Harper's heels clicking on the concrete as reality started setting in. Rye whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Damn, bro. That's one way to drop the mic." I didn't respond, didn't look back, didn't do anything except keep walking toward my truck with my head held high and my dignity still intact, which was more than I could say for my wife. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Sweet, beautiful, uncomplicated peace. No yelling, no dramatic fight, no thrown objects or slammed doors. Just the sound of my engine starting and my peace of mind rebooting like a computer that finally decided to work properly. As I pulled out of Ray's driveway and watched the party shrink in my rear view mirror, I thought to myself, well, Mason, you just witnessed your marriage die at a barbecue. At least the chicken was good. I made it home in record time, which is what happens when you're fueled by equal parts anger and clarity. I didn't speed, didn't drive recklessly, just maintained a steady pace while my brain processed the fact that my wife had basically auditioned for Girls Gone Wild Suburban Edition in front of everyone we know. I pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, and sat there for a minute in the blessed silence of my truck cab, wondering how the hell my life had become a country song without the decent guitar solo. Inside the house, I went straight to the kitchen sink and started washing my hands because apparently that's what you do when your marriage implodes. You make sure your hands are clean. Maybe it was symbolic. Maybe I was just trying to scrub away the memory of the last 2 hours. Or maybe I just needed something normal to do while my entire world tilted sideways. I was drying my hands when I heard her car pull up. 15 minutes. She lasted exactly 15 minutes at that party after I left before deciding to come home and do damage control. The front door opened and Harper walked in wearing that same dress. But now it looked less like I'm fabulous and more like I made a terrible mistake and I'm here to negotiate my way out of it. The perfume hit me before she did. She was wearing enough of it to cover a crime scene, which was fitting considering what she'd just done to our marriage. She stood in the doorway looking at me with those big eyes that usually worked like a reset button on my anger. But tonight, they just looked like a manipulation tactic I'd finally learned to recognize. "I got carried away," she said. Her voice doing that soft apologetic thing that women do when they want you to forget they just committed a social felony. I just wanted to feel noticed. I kept rinsing my hands even though they were already clean. Watching the water circle the drain like my patience feel noticed like I was some invisible ghost haunting our marriage instead of the guy who literally noticed everything, including the fact that she'd spent more time flirting with strangers than talking to her actual husband in the last 3 months. I turned off the water and grabbed the towel, taking my time drying each finger like I was performing surgery. "You were noticed," I said, keeping my voice level and calm, which seemed to unnerve her more than if I'd yelled. "The entire zip code noticed. I'm pretty sure someone in the next county noticed. You want attention? Congratulations. You got it. You're probably trending on the neighborhood Facebook group right now." She flinched at that. And I felt a tiny bit of satisfaction that I'm not particularly proud of, but also not ashamed to admit. She sighed. One of those heavy sighs that's supposed to make you feel guilty for being upset about something that's actually upsetting. "It was stupid," she admitted, walking closer and trying to touch my arm, which I subtly avoided by reaching for a glass in the cabinet. "I won't do that again." I filled the glass with water, took a long drink, and looked at her over the rim. "Tell me that tomorrow morning," I said. "Tonight, you're just trying to win customer service points. This is your please don't leave a bad review apology, not your I actually understand what I did wrong apology." Her face did this thing where it cycled through about 5 different emotions in 3 seconds. Surprise, anger, hurt, defiance, and finally landed on resigned acceptance. "That's not fair," she said. But her voice lacked conviction because we both knew it was completely fair. Midnight apologies are like those late-night infomercial products. They sound amazing when you're desperate and tired. But by morning, you realize you just bought a piece of junk that doesn't actually work. I headed upstairs to our bedroom and she followed like a puppy who knows it's in trouble but still wants dinner. I changed into my sleeping clothes, which is just an old t-shirt and gym shorts because I'm not fancy, and climbed into bed. Harper got ready for bed, too. Going through her entire nighttime routine like everything was normal, like she hadn't just humiliated both of us in front of our friends. She slipped into bed next to me, and I could feel her waiting for me to say something, to tell her it was okay, to go back to being the understanding husband who sweeps everything under the rug. Instead, I stared at the ceiling fan, watching it rotate in the darkness, and thinking about how relationships are kind of like that fan. They just keep spinning in circles, never really getting anywhere, just moving air around and calling it progress. I thought apologies at midnight are like cheap Wi-Fi. They stopped working by morning. And I was right because I could already feel the disconnect happening. That buffer symbol spinning in my brain telling me this connection was about to drop. Harper tried to move closer, probably looking for physical reassurance that we were okay, but I stayed exactly where I was, flat on my back like a corpse at a funeral for my marriage. "Mason," she whispered into the darkness. I responded, not giving her anything more because I was fresh out of emotional labor for the day. "Are we okay?" she asked, and I almost laughed because that question was so ridiculous it deserved its own comedy special. "We're existing in the same house," I said. "Whether that qualifies as okay is up for debate." She didn't say anything after that. And eventually I heard her breathing even out into sleep, which was impressive considering I was pretty sure I'd never sleep again. But somehow I did. And when I woke up the next morning, Harper was already awake, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. That's when I knew for sure the midnight apology had already expired, just like I predicted. I got up, went downstairs, and started making breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, the whole domestic dad routine. Harper came down eventually, still in her pajamas, and sat at the kitchen table watching me cook. "Morning," she said, trying to sound normal. "Morning," I replied, flipping eggs with the precision of a man who's decided to take control of the only things he can control anymore. When breakfast was ready, I sat down across from her and introduced what I was calling the new family policy, which sounds way more official than it actually was, but I needed it to sound official because I was done playing games. "No more couples nights," I announced, cutting into my eggs like I was delivering a corporate presentation. "You do your thing, I'll do mine. Separate spending money. What you earn is yours. What I earn is mine. Courtesy texts by 10 p.m. if you're going to be late. That's it. That's the new system." Harper's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "You're punishing me," she said, and there it was, the victim card. Right on schedule. I took a bite of bacon, chewed slowly, and shook my head. "Wrong," I said. "I'm protecting my sanity. There's a difference. Punishment implies I'm trying to make you suffer. I'm just trying to make me suffer less." She set down her fork, her eyes flashing with that anger that comes when someone realizes they can't manipulate their way out of consequences. "You're ridiculous," she said, crossing her arms like a teenager who just got grounded. I smiled, actually smiled, because ridiculous was the best compliment I'd received in months. "Maybe," I agreed, spreading butter on my toast with the care of a man who finally understands his worth. "But at least I'm consistently ridiculous. You know what you're getting with me. I'm reliably ridiculous. Dependably ridiculous. The Toyota Camry of ridiculous. Not exciting, but I'll get you where you need to go without drama." She rolled her eyes so hard I'm surprised they didn't fall out of her head and roll across the kitchen floor. "This is stupid," she muttered. But she didn't argue with the rules, which told me everything I needed to know. She knew she'd screwed up, and she knew I was serious. The Mason who would have apologized for setting boundaries and making her uncomfortable was gone, replaced by this new version who'd apparently discovered that self-respect feels a whole lot better than being a doormat. We finished breakfast in silence, the kind that's not comfortable, but also not hostile, just empty like a room after everyone's left the party. Harper went upstairs to get ready for whatever she had planned for the day. And I cleaned up the kitchen, loading the dishwasher and wiping down counters with the methodical precision of a man who's decided that controlling his environment is easier than controlling his marriage. As I scrubbed the last plate, I realized something profound. I just set boundaries like an adult, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, I felt better than I had in months. Who knew that not being a pushover could be so liberating? The next day, I was elbowed deep in a cabinet renovation at the Henderson place when my phone buzzed. "Harper, coming by the workshop with lunch. See you at noon." No question mark. No. Is that okay? Just a statement like she was the CEO announcing a mandatory meeting. I stared at the text for a second, debating whether to respond with, "Don't bother," or just let her come and see what happened. I chose option 2 because I was curious what kind of peace offering she'd cooked up this time. Literally, I've been running my own carpentry business for 8 years now. And my workshop is basically my sanctuary. The one place where things make sense because wood doesn't talk back. Measurements don't lie. And if something's broken, you can actually fix it with the right tools. It's a metal building behind our house that I converted into a proper workspace, complete with all my saws, sanders, workbenches, and enough sawdust to make a snowman if snowmen were made of wood particles and broken dreams. Dan, my foreman and the closest thing I have to a work wife, was helping me install crown molding when Harper's car pulled up at exactly noon. She's always punctual when she wants something. I'll give her that. She walked in wearing jeans and a sweater that screamed, "I'm a casual, down-to-earth wife who definitely didn't humiliate her husband 2 days ago." Carrying a brown paper bag that I assumed contained either lunch or a bomb. At that point, either option seemed equally likely. "Turkey and avocado," she announced, holding up the bag like she'd just discovered the cure for cancer. "Your favorite?" She smiled. That smile that used to make my knees weak, but now just made me suspicious, like when a car salesman tells you they're giving you a special deal. I wiped my hands on my work pants, which were already covered in enough sawdust to stuff a pillow, and took the bag from her. I opened it and looked inside. Sure enough, turkey and avocado on whole wheat cut diagonally because she knows I'm weird about my sandwiches. "You remembered the sandwich?" I said, pulling it out and examining it like a detective looking for evidence, but forgot the respect. Still progress. I took a bite because I'm not an idiot and free lunch is free lunch, even if it comes with strings attached that could probably tow a car. The sandwich was good. I'll admit it. Perfect ratio of turkey to avocado. Just enough mayo. That fancy bread from the bakery downtown that costs $6 a loaf. She'd put actual effort into this, which meant she was either genuinely sorry or really good at strategic apologizing. Harper's smile got tighter the way it does when she's trying not to snap at me. "I'm really trying," she said, leaning against my workbench in a casual pose that looked rehearsed like she'd practiced it in the mirror before coming over. Dan, bless his nosy soul, was pretending to measure a piece of wood about 10 feet away, but was obviously listening to every word. The man has the hearing of a bat and the gossip instincts of a middle-aged woman. At a nail salon. "Good," I said, taking another bite and chewing slowly, making her wait for my response like she'd made me wait for basic decency at that party. "Try not to make it a limited time offer, you know, like those deals at furniture stores. This weekend only. Then next weekend, it's back to regular prices and regular disrespect." She opened her mouth to respond, probably with something about me being mean or holding grudges, but I cut her off by gesturing to the cabinet I was working on. "This is oak," I said, changing the subject like a politician avoiding a scandal. "Red oak, gorgeous grain pattern, see? Doesn't lie to you. Doesn't pretend to be something it's not. Just solid, reliable wood." Harper blinked at me, clearly confused about whether I was talking about lumber or making some metaphor about our marriage. Honestly, I wasn't sure either, but it felt profound in the moment. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. That telltale sign that she was getting uncomfortable and probably regretting this little field trip to my workspace. "So, are we okay?" she asked, dropping the casual act and getting straight to the point, which I appreciated even if I didn't like the question. "Define." "Okay," I replied, setting down my sandwich and picking up a piece of sandpaper. "If you mean, are we still married? Then yes. If you mean, have I forgotten you treated our marriage like an open mic night at a comedy club? Then no." I started sanding the edge of a cabinet door, focusing on the smooth, repetitive motion because it was easier than focusing on her face. We're in this weird middle ground where you're trying to fix things by bringing me lunch and I'm trying to figure out if lunch is enough to fix things. Spoiler alert, it's not. She sighed. One of those long-suffering sighs that's supposed to make me feel like I'm being unreasonable, but I was immune to that particular tactic now. "How long are you going to punish me for one mistake?" she asked. And there it was again, the word punish. Like I was some villain in her story instead of the guy who'd been disrespected and was simply setting boundaries. "I'm not punishing you," I said, keeping my voice even and calm, which I'd learned was way more effective than yelling. "I'm just not rewarding bad behavior with instant forgiveness. There's a difference." Dan coughed. Or maybe he was choking on suppressed laughter. I couldn't tell. Harper shot him a look that could have stripped paint, then turned back to me. "Fine," she said, and I could hear the frustration creeping into her voice like water through a cracked foundation. "What do you want from me, Mason? A written apology? Public graveling? Should I take out a billboard on the highway?" I stopped sanding and looked at her. Really looked at her and realized she genuinely didn't get it. She thought this was about grand gestures and dramatic displays when really it was about simple, consistent respect. I want you to act like you're married, I said simply. Not sometimes. Not when it's convenient. Not just when you bring me a sandwich. All the time. That's it. That's the whole requirement. I picked up my sandwich and took another bite, signaling that this conversation was pretty much over as far as I was concerned. Harper stood there for another minute, probably trying to figure out if she should say something else or just cut her losses and retreat. Okay, she finally said, her voice smaller than when she'd arrived. I can do that. I nodded, not because I believed her, but because I was willing to see if she actually meant it this time. She lingered for a few more seconds, probably hoping I'd give her a hug or some sign that we were back to normal. But I just kept eating my sandwich and looking at my work. Eventually, she got the hint and headed back to her car, her heels clicking on the concrete floor of my workshop like a countdown timer on our marriage. As soon as she was gone, Dan walked over and leaned against the workbench, grinning like he'd just watched the best episode of reality TV ever made. "You two back together?" he asked, even though he'd obviously heard the entire conversation. I finished my sandwich, wadded up the paper bag, and tossed it into the trash can across the room. Made it in one shot, which felt like a small victory in a day that needed victories. "We're in beta testing," I replied, picking up my tools and getting back to work. "Expect bugs." Dan laughed so hard he nearly dropped his tape measure, and I couldn't help but smile a little myself. At least someone appreciated my pain. The rest of the day passed in comfortable silence. Just me and Dan working on cabinets and occasionally discussing whether the Henderson family would actually like the finish we'd chosen or if they'd changed their minds for the 15th time. By the time Harper left, I already knew this wasn't a peace offering. This was PR damage control. She wasn't sorry about what she'd done. She was sorry about the consequences of what she'd done. There's a massive difference between those two things. And I'd finally gotten smart enough to recognize it. A turkey and avocado sandwich, no matter how perfect, doesn't fix broken trust. It just proves you know someone's lunch order, which is the bare minimum of paying attention in a marriage. I spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about structure. Not just the physical structure of the cabinets I was building, but the structure of boundaries and expectations. Would need structure to be useful. Without proper joinery and support, even the most beautiful wood is just kindling waiting to happen. Same with marriages. Apparently, you need structure. You need boundaries. You need rules that both people actually follow instead of just nodding at and then ignoring when it's convenient. As I locked up the workshop that evening, covered in sawdust and satisfaction from a productive day, I realized something important. I'd rather be alone and at peace than married and miserable. That sandwich had been good, sure, but it hadn't changed anything fundamental about our situation. Harper was trying to fix the symptoms without addressing the disease, and I was done being her test subject for half-hearted remedies. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, I had my workshop, my boundaries, and my self-respect. And honestly, that sandwich wasn't bad either. 2 weeks after the sandwich incident, as I'd started calling it in my head, Ray and Jenna invited us over for another barbecue. I know what you're thinking. Mason, didn't the last barbecue basically destroy your marriage? Why would you go to another one? Fair question. The answer is simple. Ray makes killer ribs and I wasn't about to let my crumbling marriage ruin my access to quality smoked meat. Also, hiding at home felt like admitting defeat, and I'm too stubborn for that. Harper was on her best behavior getting ready this time. Reasonable outfit, moderate makeup, normal amount of perfume instead of the chemical warfare levels from last time. She even asked me if her dress was appropriate, which was progress, I guess. "You look fine," I told her, which was true. She looked nice, respectable, married woman, nice, not auditioning for a music video. Nice. She smiled at that, probably thinking we were back to normal. But I learned that normal was just the eye of the hurricane, and you never knew when the wind would pick up again. We arrived at Ray and Jenna's place fashionably on time, which means exactly when we were supposed to be there because I'm not cool enough to understand fashionably late. The backyard was already full of the usual suspects. Dan and his wife Carol, a few other couples from the neighborhood, and unfortunately, Becca. Becca is that friend everyone has who treats other people's business like it's her personal entertainment subscription. She's the human equivalent of a gossip blog, except the blog is better fact-checking. The party started out surprisingly normal. Rye was manning the grill like a conductor leading an orchestra, except instead of violins, it was sausages, and instead of sheet music, it was me thermometers. I grabbed a beer, claimed a spot near the cooler, and prepared myself for an evening of pretending everything was fine while secretly analyzing every interaction Harper had with anyone possessing a Y chromosome. Fun times. Harper was actually behaving herself, talking to Jenna about some Netflix show, helping set out the potato salad, laughing at appropriate volumes at appropriate times. I started to relax, which was my first mistake, because relaxing at a social gathering is basically inviting disaster to pull up a chair. My second mistake was underestimating Becca's ability to ruin a perfectly good evening with her Olympic-level meddling skills. We were about an hour into the party and I was having a legitimately good conversation with Dan about the pros and cons of different wood stains when Becca materialized next to our little group like a gossip-seeking missile that had locked onto its target. She was holding a wine glass the size of a fishbowl and wearing that smile that predators get right before they pounce. "So, Harper," she said, her voice carrying across the patio like a bad smell. "How's life with Mr. Rules and Regulations?" The entire conversation circle went quiet. You could practically hear everyone's internal oh crap alarms going off simultaneously. Harper laughed, but it was that too loud laugh that people do when they're nervous and trying to play something off as no big deal. "He made a spreadsheet for our marriage," she announced like she was sharing a hilarious anecdote instead of airing our dirty laundry in front of everyone we know. Now, first of all, it wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a list of reasonable boundaries that I typed into my notes app, but Harper had apparently workshopped this story for maximum comedic effect and minimum accuracy. Second, she'd said it in that tone. You know, the one where she's laughing but also clearly annoyed, trying to get everyone on her side by making me look like some controlling robot husband who manages marriage with Excel formulas and PowerPoint presentations. I took a sip of my beer, sat it down with deliberate calm, and smiled. Not a fake smile, not an angry smile, just a genuinely amused smile because I've been waiting for something like this and had my response locked and loaded. "And your attitude's in the red column," I said loud enough for everyone to hear, which got a snort laugh from Dan and a badly concealed giggle from Jenna. The group chuckled, that nervous laughter that happens when someone says something funny but also kind of savage. Becca's eyes lit up like she'd just discovered a new drama channel to subscribe to. "Oh, mutual respect. How romantic," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm like honey off a spoon. Except honey is sweet and Becca's sarcasm was pure vinegar. I turned to face her directly, still smiling, that calm smile that I'd perfected over the last few weeks. "It's cheaper than therapy, Becca," I said, taking another sip of my beer. "You should try it. I hear your husband's been spending a lot of time at the office lately, evening meetings, right? Very dedicated." The smile on her face froze like a computer that just realized it caught a virus. Dan choked on his beer. Someone muttered, "Oh, damn," under their breath. Harper grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. She leaned in close and whispered through clenched teeth. "That was rude." I didn't whisper back. I used my normal speaking voice because at this point, privacy was a luxury we'd given up when she decided to share our business with everyone. "Public jokes get public answers," I said, turning to look at her directly. "Company policy. You want to roast me in front of our friends, that's fine, but don't act surprised when I defend myself. I'm not a punching bag with legs." I picked up my plate and took a bite of coleslaw, chewing slowly while everyone processed what had just happened. The thing about standing up for yourself is that people aren't used to it. They're used to watching one person get dumped on while the other person smiles and takes it. And when you break that script, everyone gets uncomfortable. But you know what? Their comfort wasn't my responsibility anymore. My comfort was my responsibility. And I was tired of sacrificing mine for everyone else's. Jenna, bless her heart, tried to change the subject by asking if anyone wanted more ribs. But you can't unring a bell, and you can't unfree that particular egg. The damage was done, or the healing was done, depending on how you looked at it. Becca excused herself to go refill her wine, which was code for retreat to the kitchen and text everyone about what just happened. Harper stood next to me, stiff as a board, probably trying to decide if she should yell at me now or wait until we got home. Ray sidled up next to me, flipping burgers with the focused intensity of a man, trying to avoid eye contact with the drama happening 5 feet away. "That was intense," he said quietly, and I couldn't tell if he was impressed or concerned. "That was necessary," I replied, watching the smoke rise from the grill. I'm done being the punchline of my own marriage. Dan walked over, grinning like he'd just watched the Super Bowl and his team won. "Dude, I didn't know you had that in you," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. The old Mason would have just laughed along and felt like crap about it later. He wasn't wrong. The old Mason was a people pleaser who'd rather swallow glass than make anyone uncomfortable, even at his own expense. But the old Mason also got walked on like a doormat at a muddy boot store. So clearly that strategy needed updating. "Yeah, well," I said, finishing my coleslaw. The old Mason was an idiot who thought being nice meant being silent. The new Mason understands the difference. I looked over at Harper, who was now talking intensely with Jenna, probably getting either sympathy or a reality check. Based on Jenna's face, somewhere between amused and sympathetic, I was guessing it was a bit of both. The rest of the party continued, but there was a weird energy now, like everyone was walking on eggshells made of dynamite. People talked in smaller groups, voices a bit lower, occasionally glancing over at me and Harper like we were a nature documentary about dying relationships. Here we see the married couple in their natural habitat, attempting to socialize while their marriage circles the drain. Fascinating. Becca eventually came back outside, noticeably quieter than before, which was like seeing a hurricane suddenly downgrade to light drizzle. She avoided eye contact with me for the rest of the evening, which was honestly the best gift she could have given me. Harper maintained a polite smile, but barely talked to me, responding to my occasional comments with one-word answers and tight nods. As the party wounded down, and people started saying their goodbyes, Jenna pulled me aside near the back fence. "You okay?" she asked. And I appreciated that she asked me instead of just checking on Harper like most people did. "I'm better than I've been in months," I told her. "Honestly, turns out self-respect feels pretty good." She smiled. A real smile, not the pitying smile people usually give you when your marriage is falling apart. "Good," she said. "You deserve better than being a punching bag." I nearly snorted my drink when you clapped back at Becca. Jenna continued, laughing at the memory. "God, I miss this version of you. The version that doesn't just take it." I realized she was right. I'd been missing, too. I'd been so busy trying to keep Harper happy, trying to be the perfect, understanding husband that I'd completely lost myself somewhere along the way. And apparently, everyone had noticed except me. We left shortly after that, walking to the car in silence. Harper got in the passenger seat and stared straight ahead, and I knew I was in for either the silent treatment or a lecture about embarrassing her in public. But here's the thing, I didn't care anymore. I'd spent years caring too much about her feelings and not enough about my own, and that imbalance had nearly destroyed me. If she was mad because I defended myself, that was her problem to solve, not mine to fix. As I started the car and pulled out of Ray's driveway, I caught my reflection in the rear view mirror and barely recognized the guy staring back. He looked tired, sure, but he also looked free, like someone had cut strings I didn't even know were attached. "Me too," I muttered to my reflection. "I miss me too." Friday night rolled around like it always does, indifferent to the state of my marriage or my mental health. Harper had been giving me the cold shoulder since the barbecue incident 3 days ago, which was fine by me because silence is better than passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern. But apparently, she decided that Friday was the day to attempt another reconciliation. Because when I got home from work, the house smelled like salmon and effort. I walked in to find the dining room table actually set like with real plates and cloth napkins, not the paper towels we usually use because we're classy like that. Candles were lit, which immediately made me suspicious because the last time Harper lit candles, she was trying to cover up the smell of burnt chicken. There was music playing, too. One of those Please Love Me Spotify playlist full of acoustic covers of songs that were better in their original versions. "Hey," Harper said, appearing from the kitchen wearing an apron and a smile that was trying way too hard. "I made dinner," she said it like she'd just announced she'd cured cancer, not cooked a fish. I sat down my work bag and looked at the spread. Salmon with some kind of glaze, roasted vegetables that actually looked edible, and what appeared to be wild rice. "You cooked," I observed, stating the obvious because I genuinely didn't know what else to say. "I thought we could have a nice dinner together," she explained, pulling out a chair in a gesture that was probably meant to be welcoming, but felt more like a hostess at a restaurant I didn't want to eat at. No distractions, just us talking. I sat down because I'm not a monster and she'd obviously put work into this, even if my trust in her motivations was currently lower than my credit score after college. The salmon was actually good, I had to admit. Perfectly cooked, not dry or fishy with some kind of honey soy glaze that must have come from a real recipe and not just improvisation. The vegetables were roasted properly, not mushy or burnt. Harper had genuinely tried, which made what was about to happen even more frustrating. We ate in silence for about 5 minutes, just the sound of forks on plates and that insufferable acoustic playlist in the background. So Harper started setting down her fork with the deliberate precision of someone about to deliver a prepared speech. "I've been thinking about us." "Oh, good," I thought. Here comes the relationship talk that will somehow be about her feelings while completely ignoring the fact that she'd humiliated me in public twice. "I want things to get better," she continued. "I miss how we used to be." I took a bite of salmon, chewing slowly while I formulated a response that wouldn't immediately blow up this dinner that she'd clearly put effort into. "How we used to be," I repeated. You mean back when I just accepted whatever you did without? Question. When I was the understanding husband who never called you out on anything. She flinched slightly, which told me I'd hit the mark. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the table. We both looked at it. She looked at me, then at the phone, then back at me. It's work, she said, reaching for it. I set down my fork, the sound louder than it should have been in the suddenly tense dining room. Then let it wait, I said, my voice calm but firm. The world can survive without your emoji approval for 1 hour. It's dinner. The dinner you cooked specifically so we could talk without distractions, remember? She hesitated, her hand hovering over the phone like it was some kind of religious artifact she couldn't abandon. It might be important, she said, which is what people always say when they want to justify prioritizing literally anything over the person sitting right in front of them. More important than this conversation you wanted to have? I asked. More important than the dinner you spent time making? Because if it is, go ahead and answer it. But don't pretend this dinner was about us reconnecting when you can't even ignore your phone for 60 minutes. Harper picked up the phone. Of course she did. She stood up from the table, mumbled, "I'll just be a minute," and walked into the kitchen. I sat there, fork in hand, staring at my plate, and wondering why I was even surprised. This was Harper's pattern. Grand gestures followed by immediate proof that the gestures were meaningless. It was like watching someone build a sand castle and then immediately kick it over themselves. I could hear her in the kitchen, her voice doing that light, flirty thing it does when she talks to people she wants to impress. Not her work voice, not her I'm handling business voice, but her social voice, which meant this wasn't actually urgent work stuff. It was her checking her social media or texting friends about something that could absolutely wait until after dinner. I looked at the candles still burning uselessly on the table and felt something inside me just deflate. 12 minutes later, I counted because at that point I was petty enough to time her disrespect. She came back smiling like nothing had happened. Crisis averted, she announced cheerfully, sliding back into her chair and picking up her fork like we were just on pause. I raised an eyebrow, a talent I perfected over the last few weeks of this nonsense. Yeah, I said slowly. But your marriage is still on fire. The smile dropped off her face like a cartoon character running off a cliff. Can you stop being dramatic? She said, and there it was, the word dramatic, which is what people call you when you have reasonable reactions to unreasonable behavior. I was gone for like 2 minutes. 12. I corrected because accuracy matters when someone's trying to gaslight you about time. You were gone for 12 minutes from the dinner you cooked specifically to reconnect with me, and it wasn't even actual work. I could hear you laughing in there. So, either your work involves a lot of giggling or you're full of it. I took another bite of salmon which had gone slightly cold but was still decent. I'm going with option 2. She sighed. One of those long-suffering sighs that's supposed to make me feel guilty for being upset about something that's legitimately upsetting. You're being unreasonable, she said, which is what people say when they don't want to admit they're wrong. It was one phone call. It's never won anything with you, I replied, setting down my fork for good because I'd lost my appetite. It's one flirting session at a party, one disrespectful comment at a barbecue, one phone call during dinner, one boundary crossed, one excuse, one you're being dramatic, one you're being unreasonable. But they add up, Harper. They stack up like bills you ignore until suddenly you're bankrupt and wondering how it happened. She stared at me and for a second I thought maybe she was actually hearing me, actually understanding what I was saying. But then her face hardened into that defensive expression I'd come to know so well. I can't do anything right with you anymore, she said, which is the nuclear option of arguments. Turn it around and make yourself the victim. I cook you dinner and you attack me for answering my phone. Sweetheart, I said, leaning back in my chair with the kind of calm that comes from being completely done with a situation. If I was dramatic, there'd be popcorn and an audience. This isn't dramatic. This is me stating facts. You wanted to have dinner and talk, but you couldn't even make it 15 minutes without checking out. That's not me being unreasonable. That's you proving my point better than I ever could. The rest of dinner passed in the kind of silence that's somehow louder than shouting. Harper picked at her food, occasionally shooting me looks that range from angry to hurt to defiant. I finished my salmon because wasting good food is a sin, and I wasn't about to let my dying marriage ruin a perfectly decent meal. The acoustic playlist continued warbling in the background, singing about love and connection and all those things we apparently didn't have anymore. When I finished eating, I stood up and started clearing my plate. Thank you for dinner, I said, because my mama raised me to have manners even when my wife apparently didn't. The salmon was really good. Genuinely, you should be proud of that. I walked my plate to the kitchen, rinsed it, and put it in the dishwasher like a functional adult. Harper followed me into the kitchen, and I could feel her standing behind me, probably trying to figure out if she should apologize or double down on being defensive. "Mason," she started, but I held up my hand. "I'm going to my workshop for a bit," I said, not looking at her because if I looked at her, I might say something I'd regret or worse, something I wouldn't regret. "Thanks again for dinner." I walked out the back door into the cool evening air, headed toward my workshop, where the only drama was whether I'd cut a board at the right angle. Behind me, the house glowed with soft light from those stupid candles, and I could see Harper's silhouette in the dining room, probably sitting there wondering why her plan hadn't worked. The answer was simple, but she'd never understand it. You can't romance your way out of disrespect. You can't cook a nice meal and expect it to erase a pattern of behavior that showed your partner they weren't a priority. As I unlocked my workshop and flipped on the lights, I thought about how relationships were supposed to be about showing up for each other. And Harper kept showing me that when it came down to it, she'd always show up for everyone else first. Dinner ended in silence, except for the sound of me mentally Googling divorce lawyers again. This time I actually clicked on a few links and saved them to my bookmarks just in case. Just in case was starting to feel a lot like inevitably. And honestly, I was getting weirdly comfortable with that idea. Every Sunday for the past 2 years, Harper had dragged me to her yoga group brunch like I was a reluctant dog being taken to the vet. The group consisted of 5 women who'd met at some hot yoga class and bonded over their shared love of overpriced activewear wear and speaking exclusively in wellness buzzwords. They met at this cafe downtown that charged $14 for avocado toast and called it Artisal, which is apparently code for "we're going to rob you," but make it sound fancy. The brunches were exactly what you'd expect. A bunch of people sitting around talking about their chakras, discussing whether they should do a juice cleanse or a raw food cleanse, debating the merits of different meditation apps, and generally treating normal human activities like they were achieving enlightenment. Last time, I'd sat through a 20-minute conversation about whether almond milk or oat milk had better energy, and I'd seriously considered faking my own death just to get out of future brunches. Harper loved these brunches. Loved them. She'd spend the entire week leading up to Sunday talking about who would be there and what they'd discuss like it was some kind of exclusive summit meeting instead of 5 suburban moms eating overpriced eggs and pretending their lives were Instagram-worthy. And every Sunday she'd insist I come along because it's good for us to have couple friends and you need to be more social. Never mind the fact that I had plenty of friends who could discuss normal topics like sports and tools without bringing up their auras. This particular Sunday morning, I woke up and had what alcoholics probably call a moment of clarity. Except instead of realizing I had a drinking problem, I realized I had a doing things I hate to keep Harper happy problem. I rolled over in bed, looked at the ceiling, and thought, I'm a grown man. I pay taxes. I own power tools. Why am I spending my Sundays pretending to care about kombucha? Harper was already in the bathroom doing her pre-brunch routine, which involved approximately 47 beauty products and took longer than most surgical procedures. I grabbed my phone and opened the group chat. Yes, there was a group chat for this brunch crew because apparently we couldn't just show up without coordinating our arrival like we were planning a military operation. I typed out a message taking a break from forced enlightenment. Then I hit send before I could second guess myself, which is the key to any good act of rebellion. Commit before your brain catches up and tries to talk you out of it. I heard Harper's phone buzz in the bathroom, followed by a pause in whatever she was doing, then the sound of rapid typing. My phone immediately lit up with responses. Everything okay? From Melissa, who was nice enough, but thought essential oils could cure everything from headaches to bad marriages. We'll miss you. From Rachel, the group's unofficial cheerleader, who ended every sentence with an exclamation point like she was perpetually surprised by her own thoughts. Hope you feel better soon. From Amanda, who somehow always missed the point of everything. Then Harper emerged from the bathroom, phone in hand, face somewhere between confused and furious. What is this? She asked, holding up her phone like it was evidence in a trial. It's a text message, I said calmly, staying in bed because I'd learned that remaining physically relaxed during tense conversations helped me stay mentally relaxed. I'm taking a break from the brunch thing. You're what? Her voice went up an octave, which meant we were entering the danger zone of this conversation. Mason, we go every Sunday. It's our thing. I sat up in bed, taking my time adjusting my pillow behind me because rushing during an argument just gives the other person more ammunition. Actually, it's your thing. I corrected. I've been attending under duress for 2 years while everyone talks about their spiritual journeys, and I sit there wondering if beer at noon would be inappropriate. Harper's face cycled through several emotions, surprise, hurt, anger, and finally landing on what I called her. You're being unreasonable expression. You're dismantling our life, she said, which was incredibly dramatic considering we were talking about missing one brunch, not burning down our house. First couples nights, now this. What's next? You're going to stop coming to my work events? Probably, I said, honestly, because I was done pretending. Your work events where I stand around holding your purse while you network and I make small talk with people who think I'm your assistant. Yeah, those might be on the chopping list, too. I got out of bed and stretched, feeling vertebrae pop in a way that was deeply satisfying. No, I continued, walking toward the bathroom to brush my teeth. I'm not dismantling our life. I'm rebuilding my peace. You can visit during office hours. She followed me into the bathroom, which is a violation of international treaty laws in my opinion, but marriage apparently means no room is sacred. This is ridiculous, she said, watching me brush my teeth in the mirror like she was hoping I'd choke on toothpaste and change my mind. You're being selfish. I rinsed my mouth, dried my face, and turned to look at her directly. Selfish is expecting your husband to spend every Sunday listening to 5 women talk about their moon cycles and pretending it's enriching. I said, what I'm doing is called self-preservation. Harper stared at me for a long moment and I could see her trying to figure out which angle to take. Anger, guilt-tripping, or logical argument. She went with option 2. I just wanted us to have community, she said, her voice getting softer in that way that's supposed to make me feel like a monster. I wanted us to have friends we could share experiences with. We have friends, I pointed out, walking past her back into the bedroom to get dressed. Ray and Jenna, Dan and Carol, actual normal people who can have conversations without mentioning their wellness journey every 5 minutes, but you don't like hanging out with them anymore because they're not trendy enough or woke enough or whatever enough. I pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, the universal uniform of a man who's done playing dress up for brunch. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking like I just told her I was joining a cult instead of just skipping one brunch. So what? You're just going to stay home? She asked. What am I supposed to tell everyone? I grabbed my phone and my wallet, heading downstairs because this conversation was over as far as I was concerned. Tell them I'm sick, I called back. Tell them I died. Tell them I've been raptured. I don't care. Just don't tell them the truth, which is that their brunches are the conversational equivalent of watching paint dry while someone explains the paint's emotional journey. I made myself coffee and some actual breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, the works, while Harper got ready upstairs. She came down eventually, dressed in her yoga brunch outfit, which cost more than my entire workshop's electrical bill, and stood in the kitchen, giving me one last chance to cave. You're really not coming, she said. And it wasn't a question, more like a confirmation of my betrayal. I'm really not coming, I agreed, flipping bacon with the satisfaction of a man who's finally standing his ground. She left without saying goodbye, the door closing with just enough force to show she was mad, but not enough to technically count as slamming it. I watched through the window as she backed out of the driveway, probably already texting the group to explain my absence with whatever story would make her look least responsible for having a husband who'd finally found his spine. The house was quiet, beautifully, perfectly quiet. No rushing around. No stressing about being late. No mentally preparing myself for 3 hours of forced smiles and nods while people discuss their spiritual awakening over $12 lattes. I ate my breakfast slowly, actually tasting the food instead of just shoveling it in so we could get out the door. I watched some TV that I actually wanted to watch. I even took a nap on the couch, something I hadn't done on a Sunday in 2 years because we were always rushing to and from that damn brunch. Around 1 o'clock, Harper came home. I heard her car pull up, heard her heels on the walkway, heard the door open. I stayed on the couch, remote in hand, watching a documentary about World War II because educational programming is acceptable day drinking content. She walked into the living room and just stood there looking at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. How was brunch? I asked pleasantly because I wasn't mad at her for going. I was just relieved I hadn't gone with her. She set down her purse, kicked off her shoes, and sat in the chair across from me. It was fine, she said, which in Harper speak meant it had been either amazing or terrible, and she wasn't ready to tell me which yet. Everyone asked about you. I'm sure they did. I replied, watching a tank roll across the screen. What did you tell them? She sighed and I recognized it as her. I'm about to be honest, but I don't want to be sigh. I told them you weren't feeling well, she admitted. But then Melissa said she could bring over some essential oils that would help. And Rachel offered to do a healing meditation over FaceTime. And I realized you were right about literally everything. I looked away from the TV to see if she was serious. She was smiling a little. The kind of smile that happens when you finally admit something you've been denying. They talked about crystal energy for 45 minutes. Harper continued. And I sat there thinking about how you must have felt listening to this stuff every single week. And I felt bad. Actually bad. Not just saying it to make you feel better. Bad. Huh? I said, because I genuinely didn't know how to respond to Harper actually acknowledging something from my perspective. That's growth. She laughed. A real laugh, and came over to sit on the couch next to me. I'm not bored with you, Mason, she said quietly. I'm bored with us, with what we've become, with the routine and the going through the motions. I thought about that for a second, watching black and white footage of soldiers marching across a European landscape. Same energy, just different fonts, I said, which made her smile despite the serious conversation we were having. I'm trying to fix things, she said. And for the first time in weeks, I actually believed she meant it. Then start with silence, I replied, getting up from the couch and heading to my workshop. Sometimes the best thing you can do for something broken is give it space to figure out what it actually needs. I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the back door and turned to look at her. I'm not trying to punish you or make your life hard. I'm just trying to remember who I was before I became the guy who goes to wellness brunches. She nodded, staying on the couch, and I walked out to my workshop, feeling lighter than I had in months. The rest of Sunday passed peacefully. I worked on a bookshelf project, listened to classic rock at a volume that would have annoyed Harper if she'd been out there, and generally enjoyed the simple pleasure of doing exactly what I wanted without having to justify or explain it to anyone. Later that evening, after I'd come back inside and cleaned up, Harper made pasta for dinner. We ate together, and this time when her phone buzzed, she ignored it. We didn't talk much, but it was comfortable silence instead of tense silence, which felt like progress. Small progress, baby steps, progress, but progress nonetheless. As I went to bed that night, I thought about how sometimes the most rebellious thing you can do is simply stop doing things that make you miserable. Revolutionary. Tuesday started out deceptively normal, which should have been my first clue that the universe was about to drop-kick my life into chaos. I had a client meeting that ran late. Mrs. Chen wanted to discuss changing her kitchen cabinets for the third time, which meant I was stuck looking at paint samples and nodding while she debated between Whisper White and Cotton Ball, which looked exactly the same to my untrained eye, but apparently had vastly different energy. By the time I wrapped up and loaded my tools back into the truck, it was already past 9. I pulled out my phone and did what I'd been doing for weeks now. Sent Harper a courtesy text. Running late, home by 10 o'clock. Simple, straightforward, exactly what we'd agreed on in our new boundary system. I hit send and started driving, listening to a podcast about woodworking techniques, and feeling pretty good about my communication skills. I got home at 10:45, which was late, but not unreasonably late considering Mrs. Chin's inability to make a decision had added an extra 30 minutes to what should have been a quick meeting. The house was dark when I pulled up, which was weird because Harper usually left at least the porch light on. I unlocked the front door, flipped on the lights, and called out, "I'm home." To absolute silence. No response. No Harper sitting on the couch watching her reality shows. No sounds from upstairs. No evidence that another human being currently occupied this house. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts, nothing. I walked through the house doing that thing where you're not worried yet. But you're definitely confused. Checking rooms like she might be hiding somewhere as a prank, which would have been out of character, but stranger things had happened in this marriage. I was standing in the kitchen trying to decide if I should text her or just assume she'd gone out when my phone buzzed. Finally, I looked at the screen and read the message that would officially end my marriage. "I'm not your property. I'll be late. Don't call." I read it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Then I read it a third time because surely this couldn't be the actual response to me politely letting her know I'd be home late. The audacity of it hit me like a freight train made of disrespect and gasoline. "I'm not your property." Like I was some controlling psycho instead of a guy who'd literally just done exactly what we'd agreed to do. Sent a courtesy text. I stood there in my kitchen, still holding my work bag, covered in sawdust from Mrs. Chin's cabinet consultation, and felt something inside me just click, not snap. That would imply emotion, drama, anger. This was more mechanical, like a lock engaging or a circuit completing. I was done. Not angry. Done or sad. Done. Or even frustrated. Done. Just done. Finished. Complete. End of season. No renewal. Series canceled. I blinked once, sat down my work bag with careful precision. Opened my messages with the calm of a man who'd finally found absolute clarity and typed, "I'm not your husband anymore. Don't come back." I hit send with the same energy I'd used to confirm a dentist appointment. No drama, no second-guessing, just a simple statement of fact. Then I locked my phone, set it face down on the counter, exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for months, and said out loud to my empty kitchen. And that's the end of that season. The immediate aftermath was silence. Beautiful, Perfect silence that lasted approximately 5 minutes before my phone started having what I can only describe as a mechanical seizure. Buzz, 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 buzz. It rattled on the counter like it was possessed, lighting up with notification after notification. I picked it up and watched the missed call counter climb. 15, 20, 30 text messages started flooding in too, but I didn't read them. Didn't need to. I could guess the content. What do you mean? You can't be serious. We need to talk. And probably some creative profanity thrown in for flavor. I called Dan because if I was going to burn my life down, I needed a witness who'd appreciate the show. You busy? I asked when he picked up. Just watching TV, he said. Why? What's up? I could hear his wife, Carol, in the background asking who it was. I just ended my marriage via text message. I told him, need you to confirm I'm not having a stroke. There was a pause, then Dan's laugh, the kind that starts small and builds into something that sounds like it hurts. You did what? He managed to get out between wheezes. Hold on, Carol wants to hear this. I heard fumbling sounds. Then I was apparently on speakerphone. Repeat that, Dan said, still laughing. Harper sent me a text saying she's not my property and she'll be late and don't call. I explained, walking to the fridge to grab a beer because this conversation required alcohol. So, I told her I'm not her husband anymore and not to come back. Now, my phone is having a meltdown and I've got 50 missed calls. 50. Carol's voice came through, shocked, but also impressed. Mason, that's not a missed call list. That's a customer complaint hotline. Dan was laughing so hard I thought he might actually die. Man, that's the most boss move I've ever witnessed. Cold-blooded. Absolutely savage. Carol made a noise that was half laugh, half gasp. Dan, don't encourage him. Mason, are you okay? I'm great, I said honestly, taking a sip of beer and meaning it. I feel like I just took off shoes that were 2 sizes too small. Everything hurts, but also I can finally breathe. The phone was still buzzing in my hand. Harper's name lighting up the screen over and over like a neon sign at a failing casino. Should I answer? I asked, more curious than concerned. Absolutely not, Dan and Carol said in unison, which made me laugh. Let her sweat, Dan added. She sent you that disrespectful text thinking you'd just take it like you always do. She needs to understand there are consequences. Carol made a humming noise of agreement. What are you going to do? She asked. Pack her stuff, I said, looking around my suddenly peaceful house. Change the locks. Maybe order a pizza. It's Tuesday. They have that 2-for-1 special. I heard Dan lose it again in the background. This man is ending his marriage and thinking about pizza deals. He wheezed. That's the energy I aspire to. I hung up after promising to call them if anything crazy happened. Then I got to work. I pulled out suitcases from the hall closet, the matching set we'd gotten as a wedding gift from her parents, which felt appropriately symbolic, and started methodically packing Harper's things, clothes from the closet, shoes from the ridiculous organizer she'd insisted we needed, toiletries from the bathroom that cost more than my truck payment. I wasn't angry packing, throwing things around, and making a mess. I was compacting, folding clothes properly, and organizing things like I was packing for a vacation she'd never come back from. My phone continued its seizure on the bed, lighting up and buzzing with the desperation of someone who'd finally realized they'd pushed too far. 60 missed calls. 70 text messages were coming in so fast, I couldn't have read them if I wanted to, which I didn't. This wasn't about punishing Harper or making her suffer. This was about finally having enough self-respect to recognize when something was broken beyond repair. I called Todd the locksmith around midnight. Todd and I go way back. We play poker sometimes, and he'd done the locks when we first bought the house. Hey, man, I said when he answered, sounding groggy. Sorry to call so late. How fast can you change my locks? There was a pause. Then Todd's voice came back more alert. Marriage trouble? He asked because Todd's not stupid. Marriage over, I corrected. Need to make my door Harper-proof. Todd laughed, that knowing laugh of a man who'd probably gotten similar calls before. The brand new limited edition Freedom model, he joked. Exactly. I confirmed. How soon can you get here? He said he could come first thing in the morning, which worked because I doubted Harper would come home tonight anyway. She'd probably crash with one of her yoga friends and complain about her unreasonable husband who dared to have boundaries. I finished packing by 1 a.m., leaving the suitcases neatly lined up by the front door like soldiers awaiting deployment. For suitcases that contained 2 years of living together and 10 years of marriage, it seemed both too much and not enough. I took a shower, washing off the sawdust and the remnants of my old life, and climbed into bed in the master bedroom that was now just mine. The phone had finally stopped buzzing around call number 87. I looked at it one last time before setting it on the nightstand. The screen showed a final text from Harper. "Mason, please, we need to talk." No punctuation, probably typed while crying or angry or both. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say that hadn't been said in my one perfect text message. As I turned off the light and settled into bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness exactly. Not that rush of excitement or joy, but deep genuine peace. The kind that comes from finally stopping a behavior that's been slowly killing you. The house was quiet. My phone was silent. And tomorrow, Todd would change the locks and Harper would find her suitcases on the porch, and my new life would officially begin. I smiled in the darkness, thinking about Dan's reaction and Carol's shocked laugh and the sheer absurdity of ending a marriage with 18 words. Somewhere across town, Harper was probably telling her friends about her horrible husband who'd kicked her out over nothing. But here in my bed, in my house, in my peace, I knew the truth. This wasn't about nothing. This was about everything. And I'd finally done something about it. "Alexa," I said to the smart speaker on the nightstand, "play Single Ladies." Beyoncé's voice filled the bedroom, and I laughed. Actually laughed for the first time in months. Tomorrow would bring drama and phone calls and probably some crying. But tonight I was free. And that feeling was worth every missed call, every angry text, and every judgmental look I'd get from people who thought I should have tried harder. I tried plenty. Now I was trying something new, choosing myself. I was in that perfect state between awake and asleep, where your brain is finally shutting down after processing the fact that you just nuked your marriage from orbit. When I heard it, the unmistakable sound of someone trying to use a key that no longer worked. Rattle, rattle, jiggle, rattle, then silence, then more aggressive rattling. Like maybe the problem was that the key just needed more force to remember its job. I looked at the clock on my nightstand. 12:47 a.m. So Harper had decided to come home after all. Probably after exhausting her friend's patience with her version of events where I was the villain and she was the victim of unreasonable expectations like basic respect. I lay there for a second debating whether to get up or just let her figure it out on her own. The rattling continued, now accompanied by the sound of someone trying to force a lock that had been changed approximately 6 hours ago by Todd, who'd shown up at 7 a.m. with coffee and a knowing smile. Then came the knocking. Not polite knocking. Not "excuse me, I think there's been a misunderstanding" knocking, but full-on. "I'm about to break down this door," pounding that probably woke up the neighbors. "Mason." Harper's voice came through the door loud enough to qualify as a public disturbance. My keys not working like this was some kind of technical malfunction instead of a deliberate choice. I sighed, threw back the covers, and padded downstairs in my pajama pants and t-shirt. Through the front door's window, I could see Harper standing on the porch in the same clothes she'd been wearing yesterday. Her hair doing that thing where it's both messy and somehow still deliberately styled. She saw me approaching and her face lit up with relief that immediately died when I opened the door with the security chain still attached. "Mason, what?" she started, but I cut her off by gesturing to the neat row of suitcases lined up just inside the doorway, perfectly visible through the 6-inch gap the chain allowed. Her eyes went from me to the suitcases to me again, processing what she was seeing like a computer trying to load a web page on dial-up internet. "It's a feature, not a bug," I said calmly, my voice still rough from sleep, but my resolve crystal clear. She blinked at me like I'd just spoken ancient Greek. "What?" She managed to get out, her brain clearly struggling to catch up with the reality of the situation. "The lock," I clarified, leaning against the doorframe with the casual energy of a man who'd gotten the best sleep he'd had in months. "It's changed deliberately, on purpose, with intention." Harper's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then landed on anger with the speed of someone flipping through TV channels. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice rising to a pitch that dogs 3 counties over probably heard. She tried to push the door open, but the chain held firm, which seemed to make her even angrier. "Is this a joke? Did you seriously change the locks?" "I seriously changed the locks," I confirmed, reaching down to grab the first suitcase and maneuvering it through the narrow opening. It thunked onto the porch, followed by the second one, then the third and fourth. "It's called consequences. You triggered them." I said it matter-of-factly, like I was explaining how a toaster works, because honestly, the cause and effect here seemed pretty straightforward to me. She stared at the suitcases like they were alien artifacts that had suddenly materialized on her porch. "You can't do this," she snapped, her voice hitting that frequency that makes your teeth hurt. "We're married. This is my house, too." I shook my head slowly, still maintaining that eerily calm demeanor that was clearly freaking her out more than if I'd been yelling. "You mistake me for a man asking permission," I said, and I watched those words land like a punch. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, genuinely speechless, which was a rare and beautiful thing. "You sent me a text message telling me you're not my property and not to call you. So, I respected your independence by ending our marriage and giving you your stuff back. You're welcome." "That's not I didn't mean," she sputtered, trying to find words that would somehow rewrite the last 12 hours. "You're being insane." Ah, there it was. Insane. The word people use when they can't believe someone finally stood up to them. I smiled. Not a mean smile. Just genuinely amused by the absolute audacity of her calling me insane when she was the one who'd set this entire sequence of events in motion. "No," I corrected gently. "Insane would be continuing to accept disrespect because I'm afraid of being alone. This is sanity. This is self-preservation. This is me finally understanding that I deserve better than a wife who treats courtesy as an insult." A light came on in the neighbor's house, Mr. Peterson's place. Great. Now we'd have witnesses to this circus. Harper's eyes were starting to water, and I recognized the beginning of tears that could be either genuine emotion or tactical manipulation. With Harper, it was usually a blend of both. "Mason, please," she said, her voice dropping to that soft, vulnerable tone that used to make me cave immediately. "We can talk about this. I was just upset. I didn't mean what I said in that text. But you sent it anyway," I pointed out, still standing in my doorway like a bouncer at the world's saddest club. "And that tells me everything I need to know about what you actually think versus what you say when you want something. You thought you could text me something disrespectful and I'd just take it. You were wrong." She wiped her eyes, smearing mascara across her cheek. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, and I genuinely didn't know if she expected me to have an answer or if this was rhetorical. "Your mom's place," I suggested. "Beckus, one of your yoga friends who's always talking about their guest room and positive energy." "I don't know, Harper. And honestly, it's not my problem anymore. You'll regret this," she said. And there it was. The threat, the final card people play when they've run out of reasonable arguments. Her voice had steel in it now, the tears drying up as anger took over. "When you're alone and miserable, you'll regret pushing me away." I considered this for a moment, genuinely gave it thought, then shook my head. "Maybe," I admitted, "because I'm not a fortune teller, and who knows what future Mason would feel. But at least I'll regret it in peace. And honestly, that sounds pretty good right now." I started to close the door, but she stuck her foot in the gap, which was either brave or stupid or both. "Mason, don't do this," she pleaded one more time. "We can fix this. I'll change. I'll be better." I looked at her foot, then at her face, then back at her foot. "Move your foot," I said quietly. "Harper, I'm not kidding. Move your foot or I'm calling the police for trespassing." Her eyes widened. She hadn't expected that level of commitment to my decision. She pulled her foot back slowly, still staring at me like she was waiting for me to crack, to break, to turn back into the pushover Mason who'd tolerated this nonsense for years. "Goodbye, Harper," I said, and closed the door. I turned the deadbolt with a satisfying click that sounded like freedom, then stood there listening to her on the other side. I heard a sob, then what might have been a kick to one of the suitcases, then the sound of her dragging luggage down the porch steps. Each thump of a suitcase on a step was like a countdown to my new life. I walked to the living room window and watched her load the suitcases into her car, a process made difficult by the fact that she was crying and angry and had apparently never realized how heavy 4 suitcases actually are. Mr. Peterson was definitely watching from his window, too. I could see his curtain moving. Tomorrow the whole neighborhood would know, which meant tomorrow would bring phone calls and questions and probably some judgment. But right now, watching Harper's tail lights disappear down the street at 1:15 in the morning, I felt nothing but relief. Relief so profound it was almost physical, like someone had been standing on my chest for years and finally stepped off. I locked the front door, the new lock that only I had keys for, and set the security chain back in place because apparently I was paranoid now or smart or both. I walked back upstairs, climbed into bed, and stared at the ceiling for a minute. My phone was mercifully silent. Harper had apparently gotten the message that calling was pointless. The house settled around me with those creaks and pops that houses make. Sounds I'd barely noticed before, but now seemed louder in the absence of tension and drama. "Alexa," I said into the darkness. "Play Single Ladies." Beyoncé's voice filled the bedroom again, and I laughed. The kind of laugh that's half crazy and half liberated. I grabbed my phone and texted Dan. She came back. I gave her the suitcases through a chain door and sent her away. "It's done." His response came back almost immediately. Legendary. You're buying the first round on Friday. I set my phone back down, turned off the music, and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I deal with the fallout, the calls from her parents, the questions from friends, the inevitable social media post from Harper's side, painting me as the villain in her story. But tonight, in my house, with my new locks and my boundaries firmly in place, I was at peace. The last thought I had before falling asleep was simple. Dignity feels better than company. I'd rather be alone and respect myself than partnered and miserable. It had taken me 10 years of marriage to learn that lesson, but better late than never. As sleep finally claimed me, I smiled into my pillow and thought about how sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is close a door that should have been closed years ago. Mr. Peterson could gossip all he wanted. Harper could tell whatever version of this story made her feel better. None of it mattered because I'd finally done the one thing I should have done months ago. I'd chosen myself, and that choice, delivered through a chain door at midnight with 4 suitcases as punctuation, was the best decision I'd made in years. The house was quiet, my conscience was clear, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I fell asleep, actually looking forward to tomorrow. The next morning, I filed the divorce papers. Paperwork never felt so spiritual. Ray called asking if I was serious, and I told him, I'm calm. That's scarier than serious. Harper's dad came by to collect more of her things, and we had that silent nod exchange that men do when words would just complicate things. When he said Harper was having a hard time, I replied, so is my doormat, but I'm still replacing it. That night, Rye and Jenna came over with ribs. We ate on the back patio, and for the first time in years, the laughter wasn't forced. Nobody was walking on eggshells or avoiding topics that might upset Harper. We just existed, talked about normal things, and enjoyed being alive. Peace, I thought, tastes like smoke and freedom. It tastes like making decisions for yourself and not apologizing for having boundaries. It tastes like ribs shared with actual friends who don't require you to pretend everything's fine when it's not. Weeks later, I ran into Becca at the grocery store. She's miserable, Becca said, like this was information I needed. She didn't mean that text. I smiled, grabbing cereal off the shelf. And I didn't mean my reply, but look how great that turned out. Becca squinted at me. You're colder than I thought, I chuckled. No, I'm just room temperature now, comfortable for humans. Months passed. I bought a smoker, hit the gym, and rediscovered my love for silence. When people asked if I'd ever take Harper back, I said, no refunds, no exchanges. I learned something simple but profound. Peace isn't boring. It's just the absence of stupid. It's the freedom to exist without drama, without walking on eggshells, without sacrificing your self-respect for someone else's comfort. When my phone buzzed late one night with Harper's name on the screen, I laughed and whispered to the darkness, sorry, sweetheart. This number no longer accepts drama. Then I blocked it and went back to sleep, surrounded by the most beautiful sound in the world, silence.